Okay, this is item number 11. It's an application for a modification of use in bulk at 116 West 23rd Street in the Ladies Mile Historic District, docket number 16-1461, block 798, lot 41, a commercial palace-style department store designed in phases between 1889 and 1911 by a series of architecture firms, including William Schickel and Company, Buckman and Deisler, Buckman and Fox, and Taylor and Levi. This is an application to request that the Landmarks Preservation Commission issue a report to the City Planning Commission relating to an application for a special permit pursuant to Section 74-711 of the zoning resolution, seeking waivers necessary to maintain the existing signage.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Olivia Brzee, Preservation staff. The item is 116 West 23rd Street. And the sign in question is this vertical blade sign installed at the southeast corner of the building. Commissioners will know that this sign is approved at a public hearing in 1995. And as one of the requirements for the special permit, the owners, in cooperation with the tenant Burlington Coat Factory, have undertaken extensive restoration of the building, including of the storefronts, which you'll see, and also the upper stories of the building. And all of that restorative work has been approved at staff level and is largely complete. Jessica Lozer of Ackerman LLP will present the details.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Jessica Lozer, as was mentioned, and I am here to talk to you about the Burlington Coat Factory sign, as you just heard. The building, just to go through the stats of the building, its other address is 695-709 6th Avenue, located within the Ladies Mile Historic District on 6th Avenue between 22nd and 23. The building goes throughout the entire block facade. It's a lot area of approximately 29,000 square feet. That will be relevant with respect to sign size in a moment. Burlington is the main retail tenant in the building, and the upper floors contain office use. As was mentioned, 19 years ago, Burlington received, as part of a larger facade improvement, approval for the existing blade sign. And at the time, what was not known is that the sign did not conform that was not in compliance with Department of Building regulations. It is non-compliant with CR Section 32-652 because it projects 6 feet 2 inches over the lot line, where only 1 foot 6 inches is allowed, and Section 32-655 because the sign is 61 feet from the curb level, where only 40 feet is allowed according to the zoning resolution. It's important to note that the sign is only 117 square feet, whereas the building would be allowed to have 500 feet in signage over the facade. Sign has become...
I should just clarify, the commission has already approved the sign, so that's
Correct.
not really what the application is for.
Correct. We're here to legalize the sign. Burlington was completely unaware that the sign was not approved by the Department of Buildings when it erected the sign 19 years ago. It was informed that there was an open application on the DOB website. When it went to close that application, it became aware that the sign was out of compliance. In order to legalize the existing sign, the applicant has gone forward with a 74-711 application to, first through Landmarks and then to City Planning to legalize the sign. And as you can see in the materials before you, bear with me, new cast iron, glass, and new mosaic and terracotta tile has been completed and installed throughout the facade. This restoration project is within the areas that are controlled by Burlington. As a tenant of the building, they had to coordinate with the property owner to facilitate the restoration of the entire facade. Burlington, as a tenant, is going through this process because it feels very strongly that its identity in New York, and in particular in Chelsea, which is now its flagship store, is very much connected to the sign and has undertaken over $1 million in expense of restorations to the facade as part of its legalization of the sign. And if you can see on page 3 of your packets, this is what a complying sign would look like. Right there, and that is an enlarged rendering of it. I can't even see it. That's what a complying sign would look like. The regulations only allow for 1 foot over the lot line. There's no blade sign, no different blade sign regulations in the zoning resolution or in the Department of Buildings Code. So we are limited to that projection. In addition, it would be so small because the sign sits above the first floor.
Right. And just to clarify, so in 1995, I think it was, the commission approved these signs saying that it was appropriate. 15, 20 years later, they realized that it's not compliant with the zoning. There's a provision in the zoning resolution which allows an applicant to come forward to waive the zoning, so they have to go to city planning after this. But the basis for the waiver is tied to really a preservation aspect at landmarks. And so our duty is to, in fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, we usually, it usually involves preservation, restoration work, and it also includes a continuing maintenance program. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
So that is something that's also a part of the application. It allows for the long-term maintenance of our buildings and buildings within historic districts. And then the commission will review the appropriateness from a zoning standpoint, whether the waivers are appropriate or not.
And just to add
Yes.
to your very succinct summary, that it's also a commitment to keeping the facade in a first-class condition, which is a much higher level of care than a standard application.
Questions? Yes. Roberta, go ahead.
Just a question about that. So the size of the approved sign versus the one that is legal, I guess. What is that height difference?
The sign currently sits at 60 feet from the curb level, whereas the zoning resolution only allows for 40 feet.
And the height versus the height?
The actual height of the, it's not measured so much as the height of the
So
sign.
height would be the same? Are we saying that?
The sign would remain the same,
No, what is the legal, what is the?
40 feet from the curb.
But the same height?
This, meaning, you know, sort of like Lego, like you'd slide it up and down. Well, we would have some difficulty because we wouldn't want to disturb the features of the building
So
by
you're saying
attaching a sign to
the length
it.
of the length of the sign theoretically could be the same because it's a surface area, but the location of the sign would have to be lowered so that it doesn't exceed 40 feet from the ground level.
Okay.
A technical question?
Yes.
How can a tenant apply for a 74-711?
Well, in this case, the owner is cooperating with the tenant, and we do have an agreement from the owner to the tenant, giving the tenant permission to undertake this, because we had that
Is
exact,
that written into the deed and all that stuff? Because all the burden falls on the owner, not on the tenant.
ultimately, yes. What has happened is we had this exact same concern, and the tenant has actually put money into escrow to meet their obligations going forward, and the owner of the property has agreed in writing to the tenant pursuing this application.
Love that sign.
All right, any other questions? Okay, we'll take testimony. Jack Taylor?
I'm Jack Taylor of Protect the Ladies Mile District. In stark contrast to the next Ladies Mile item coming up on the Commission's calendar today, the applicant representing the former Eric Brothers department store building has done a splendid job of recently restoring his principal facade, and in our opinion, eminently deserves a waiver to permit the retention of the sign on the 6th Avenue frontage, an installation that was approved by this agency in the years following the 1989 designation of the Ladies Mile Historic District. In the retail history of the district, and especially of the impressive palaces of commerce, as they were called, that grew up along its wide avenues, such signage is appropriate. The dawn of neon lighting climaxed the Gilded Age of Ladies' Mile's glory years preceding the First World War. Thus, it would have been entirely likely that this cast iron department store might have identified itself by illuminated devices of this nature. Only a few weeks ago, the Commission dealt with lighted signage on the Old Navy store building farther south on 6th Avenue in the Ladies' Mile Historic District, emphasizing the appropriateness of retail identification by means of facade illumination. Thank you.
Christabel Goff for the Society for the Architecture of the City. The restoration of this building, uncovering the decorated piers, has been a delightful surprise and cause for comment and celebration in the community before this application came forward. The sign was previously found appropriate from the historic preservation standpoint, and we strongly support the 74-711 application. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? Any more speakers? All right, are there any questions for the applicant? Any questions? All right, we can close the hearing. Okay. Are there any comments on this case? I think, again, the issue here is whether the commission feels comfortable recommending to the City Planning Commission that they believe that they've got the preservation and the maintenance program, which I think is a good thing for this agency and for preservation. Normally, we would also be looking at the sign itself in tandem with this application, but the reality is the sign has already been approved by this commission and was deemed appropriate, so we don't have to really revisit that issue again. Yes, any concerns? Yes.
And the only thing I would say is that I think it's a great application. I just would say that in the broader context, we should try to work with city planning to make this process easier, more regular,
agree.
and just more smooth, so that this can happen more often.
Right, and I think what Michael is referring to is, are there ways to have a more efficient process where people do not have to just come both to landmarks and then go through ULEP after that, and it takes overall, 3-4 years to get through a process. And especially in situations where the commission prefers to see buildings that are constructed waiving the zoning because it actually fits better in the context of our districts. All right, if we have no other comments, I'll close the hearing. Addie, do you want to read the resolution? Sure. Okay, thanks.
So in the case of 116 West 23rd Street, Ladies Mile Historic District, the application is for a special permit pursuant to Section 74711 of the zoning resolution, seeking waivers necessary to maintain an existing sign. And recommend approval, finding that the restorative work approved pursuant to LPC 135636 and LPC 142785 has returned the building closer to its original appearance, that the restorative work, including the removal of non-historic storefront infill and a commission-approved metal canopy at the 6th Avenue entrance for the installation of new metal and glass storefront infill featuring transom signage, sign bands with the fascia at the storefront cornices and leaded light clerestory windows, the restoration of historic storefront elements including cornices and fascia, awning housings and armatures, decorative piers with brackets and flagpole supports, and repair and repainting of the upper stories of the building, including selective repair to decorative metal elements and stone trim, has brought the building up to a sound, first-class condition, aided in its long-term preservation, and reinforced the architectural and historic character of the building, the streetscape, and the historic district. That the applicant, with support of the owners of the building, has committed to establishing a cyclical maintenance plan that a restrictive declaration will be filed against the property which will bind the applicants and all heirs, successors, and assigns to maintain the continuing maintenance program in perpetuity, and that the proposal is supportive of the preservation of the building and the special architectural and historic character of the Ladies Mile Historic District.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, this application's been approved.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.